This episode is in partnership with Authority Magazine. Authority Magazine, a Medium publication, is devoted to sharing in-depth and interesting interviews featuring people who are authorities in business, pop culture, wellness, social impact, and tech.
I'm joined today by the incredible Dr. Joy Miller, founder of Resiliency 2025 at resiliencyandhappiness.com. She is a global authority on resilience. Joy is a psychotherapist, international speaker, and wellness advocate who's dedicated her life to helping people rise through adversity and rediscover joy. And I'm thrilled to say that she is also my friend. Joy and I are welcoming our guests today. They bring powerful voices to the conversation about resilience and reinvention. Alisyn Camerota is an award-winning journalist and former CNN anchor known for her thoughtful storytelling and fearless reporting. Stephanie Szostak is a celebrated actress and mental wellness advocate who shares her own path of self-discovery and emotional fitness through her initiative, WOW, Women on the Way. Alisyn and Stephanie, welcome to Believe in People.
Thank you, Amy. Great to see you, Joy. I'm really happy, as I know Stephanie is, to be part of this.
Thanks, Alisyn, for introducing me to this lovely group. I'm happy to be here too.
Well, thank you both. I really appreciate it. Okay, before we dive in, I want to ask you, what's something small that brought you joy so far? I know it's only Tuesday, this week.
Okay, I'll start because I had a moment of tremendous joy this morning. My son, who's a senior in high school, has had this final paper on the Vietnam War hanging over his head all semester. It's a dense, very dense, as you guys know, topic. It involved a lot of research. I was involved because, it's hard for a 17/18-year-old boy to write a dense paper. And so last night, I was so excited to do yoga at this exact moment. And my son bounded out of the office and said, "I'm ready to work on the paper." I was like, oh my God, at 10 p.m. And so we worked on it and it was farther along than I thought. And this morning he was done with it and he hands it in. So that is a huge joy.
I just had joy having my cup of coffee this morning. I was traveling for the past 2 days, and last night I went to bed and I said to my husband, I can't wait for coffee tomorrow morning.
It's those little things, right?
Yeah.
I know.
It really is. And I love the answers because it's the little things that really make a difference. And I'm curious because I've talked to both of you extensively, I think, at this point, and you both have flourishing careers, but you both decided to write books. And I'm curious, what took you into the field of writing, but you both went into kind of the field of mental health in some ways?
Stephanie, go ahead. I want to hear your answer.
Okay. I never intended on writing a book, but during COVID, when we were all stuck at home, a mental health nonprofit that I met on a show called The Million Little Things, the mental health nonprofit is called Give an Hour. They called me and they asked me, what do I do for my well-being? They wanted to do webinars for their community to come together around well-being and share practices. And I was hesitant to share what I do because there's no one size fits all and we're all different. But I shared something that I created, which I call a playbook, because my challenge in well-being was we come across so much wisdom, but then when we're down in the dumps, when life is hard and emotions are high or pressure is high, we don't remember all this wisdom. And so I created a playbook which is kind of a repository with all inspiration, wisdom, memories that remind me that I've done hard things. And so I thought, well, that's something I'll share. And they loved it. We did a series of webinars for their community to create their playbook, to encourage them. And then out of this, somebody DM'd me and said, I'm still not clear what goes in my playbook. Could you write a book, a workbook? And I thought, well, that's a good idea. Let me ask Givenhour. And I said, would you do this with me? I'll write it, but I'd like to send it to you to have mental health professional look at it and vet it and do it with your community, add stories from other ambassadors. And that's how it came about. And 50% of the proceeds go to Givenhour.
Wow.
and
great.
and and I've just started, I knew, obviously I've read Stephanie's book when it came out. I think interviewed her, she's interviewed me. So I've been around her book, but I just hadn't had time to use it. And seriously, yesterday, Stephanie, when you and I recently saw each other, I was like, I've got to start writing in my Selfish Playbook. And so I started doing it yesterday, and it was so great because you give also hints of like how to pair it with images and stuff, like a pearl of wisdom, and how to pair it with an image, and how to keep that in an album on your phone. And I'm not technically minded. And I started doing that very thing. And it's great because I can just flip right to it when I need a boost of wisdom.
Actually,
It's
and just as you
amazing.
said that, Joy was holding up Selfish.
Yes, I was
Uh,
trying to get it in there.
yep.
Yep.
And that's fabulous. Selfish. Isn't that great? We're so hesitant to work help ourselves, aren't we?
We are.
And yet I think it's so um not even, I was gonna even say brave to just to say, yeah, I'm selfish. And because it helps everyone when we are, doesn't it?
Well, yeah, and it's kind of a tongue-in-cheek, obviously, title,
Yeah.
selfish. But the reason I like that title was because when I was younger, I thought self-help was poo-poo, and I was like, George Carlile, who did a skit. I don't know if you ever saw it. Life is not that complicated. People who write self-help books, you just wake up in the morning, you go to work, you take a poop, and then you go to bed. And I was kind of like that. And but I loved the idea of taking time for ourselves. And it's also all the exercises in there are linked to all the self-worth, self-esteem, self-confidence, all these self uh, qualities that we can develop and learn to grow. And now, Alisyn, talk about your book, because I
Yeah.
adore your book, which is about coming home to yourself.
Thank you. Thank you, Stephanie. Thanks for getting it so completely. Yeah, so I wrote, so as you guys know, I've written two books. One was a novel called Amanda Wakes Up, about my time in cable news primarily. It's sort of a romanicale about what it was really like inside cable news at the time. And then when I was on the book tour for that book, people kept saying, is this really you? Is this really about you? Like they immediately knew that fiction was just the veil, and it was really kind of a memoir. And I was like, yes. And so then I decided after that I would really just peel back that layer and write my own memoir. And the reason it's called Combat Love, and the reason that I wrote it was because I just felt like for my own mental health and closure, I had to get these stories that were bouncing around in my head out and onto paper. I don't think I had a lot of resolution in my life. I bounced around as a teenager. I lived in 6 houses in 2 years during high school. Sometimes I didn't have anywhere to live. And so I didn't have resolution. And writing it allowed me to kind of go back to the past and put the pieces together in a narrative form. And, look, my job as a journalist, I'm always telling other people's stories. I'm a conduit for other people's stories. And I started to feel like, oh, my own story is unresolved. And maybe I should work on telling that one. And I'll tell you, since writing it and since publishing Combat Love, it has given me a lot of freedom of mental bandwidth and mental space, like getting those stories, purging those stories from my brain that was always trying to solve them, and putting them out in the world and on paper has freed me. And so I'm really glad that I did that.
And
Can I
actually,
ask a question?
yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Do you feel that putting them on paper in a way gives them freedom to just be and accept them, and then it's not like in your head, and some days you're thinking they're holding you back, or there's guilt, there's like it's in a way, it's like a separation from, trying to express myself and I'm not doing a good job at it. But like putting things on paper in a way helps us process, but also gives the stories the freedom to be without necessarily making it part of our identity. Do you know what I'm trying
Well,
to
I
say?
know the way I interpret what you're saying is, as you well know, writing a book is kind of a form of giving birth. And so there's this long gestation period. And so my stories were like gestating and gestating and gestating. It was like the longest gestation period, for decades. And so by birthing it and putting it out into the world, yes, it can have its own life. And yes, I don't have to do the work anymore of having to find the ending for them. And so part of why I was so relieved once I published it was because I did have to go back and do research, and I did have to interview the people with whom I had a lot of unfinished business. I had a lot of like love relationships that I just left because, as a teenager in my 20s, I was moving. I wasn't terribly considerate of other people's feelings. I was in survival mode. And so I had to go back and give those moments closure. And that was just very, very healing for me.
And actually, so Alisyn, just to that point, what was life like when you were growing up?
So I was an only child. I was the only child of two kind of charismatic intellectuals. And when they got for a while, it was okay. My childhood was sort of normal or seemingly normal, although it was clear that my father was kind of in a depressed state and drinking too much, and that my mother was just trying to, hold it together. And then when they got divorced when I was 8, my world changed a lot, and my mother's world changed a lot. So I was very attached to my mother. And then suddenly she was a single woman in the 70s, and she had her own path, and she wanted to sort of set sail away from our suburban home. And I wanted to put down roots because I really wanted attachment and belonging. And those two things were totally at cross purposes. And I, because I was a kid, had to go along on her ride until at 16, I decided that it wasn't her ride, wasn't working for me, of moving around, of leaving from house to house. She had various boyfriends. And so I left home at 16. And then I was really in survival mode and had to make it work for myself. But somehow that felt better than having to be on somebody else's ride. So, there were hard times. There were definitely hard times, but there was also a lot of freedom, and that is intoxicating in its own way. And so it's kind of the story of, my freedom as a teenager and the risks that come with that.
Wow. And Stephanie, what was your upbringing like?
I grew up in France with an American dad and a French mom and an older brother who was 8 years older than me and who was my absolute hero because he was a rebel and he um, didn't think like my parents. He didn't want to do anything that my parents did, and he questioned the world. I mean, he was a vegetarian. He later became a Rastafari, had dreadlocks, but he also fell into addiction and heroin addiction, which, as anyone knows who's lived in a household with addiction, there means there's a lot of volatility, there's a lot of pain, there's a lot of lies. My parents suffered tremendously, but also were unbelievable. My dad said numerous times that my brother was like a lost ship at sea, and they had to be the harbor to always welcome him back. So I was 8 years younger watching all of this, and I think I tried to not cause any waves. And so I became sort of the good girl, maybe on the surface, but behind the scenes did my own little, rebel in quotes, nothing too drastic. But I also tried to, I became a bit of a people pleaser, wanting to make sure I was doing the right thing. And that's something that caught up to me later in life, that I had to address. Um, yeah, and I think, I wanted to be a social worker when I was a teenager to help kids like my brother. And but I went to college and studied business instead. But later, when I started acting at 30, I felt somehow this was similar to, it wasn't about helping other people, but it was about connecting to human beings and understanding why they think the way they think and do the things they do, why they get in their own way. And that's those, I felt my brother right there with me when I decided to go into acting.
Oh.
It's interesting because you both are so resilient, and you had all sorts of source going on in your childhood, for both of you. And I'm curious, you in some ways you had other people, but you were alone. So who was the inspiration in those times, or was there an inspiration for you?
Go ahead, Alisyn.
Well, I mean, my book, Combat Love, it talks about, I mean, not explicitly, but when I read it now, I see it come through loud and clear, the power of friendship. And so I had a lot of very close friends as a teenager. My girlfriends were basically surrogate sisters. You know, I didn't have sisters. And so I was very attached to my friends, and I often stayed at their homes for days on end. When I think about what their parents had to put up with me, like just eating out of the refrigerator in my nightgown, you know, as a teenager, like it's amazing now that I have teenagers, what I put these poor parents through, you know, just like parking in their driveway, like not worrying about them getting out of the garage, like, you know, just the inconsideration of a teenage girl who like shows up in their house and won't leave. And that's who I was, you know? And so my friends, I think, you know, really saved my life, literally and figuratively. And to this day, I mean, I just think that, and I had lots of guy friends also. I don't think that it's just girlfriends, though my girls certainly showed up for me when when I needed the cavalry. And to this day, I mean, you know, Stephanie and I have talked about this. Like, Stephanie is a dear friend of mine, and I have obviously gone through a huge loss in the past year, losing my husband to cancer. And I love the kind of friendship that I have with Stephanie, where I can just call and be like, "Hi, can I come over for wine right now?" And she's like, "I'm popping the cork, you know, see you in 5 minutes." And that's a wonderful type of friendship where you can just show up and not have to be dressed up, not have any pretense, and somebody can just be there for you.
That's huge. I mean, that's really powerful. For the two of you, your careers have both placed you in the public eye. What personal moment of, I guess, vulnerability taught you most about your own strength?
Stephanie, this is right in your wheelhouse. You go.
What in the public eye, vulnerability in the public eye
Yeah,
that
on
taught
the
us?
set, when you were on set and had
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, I would say that yes, when my career started actually gaining momentum, I lost my confidence on set because I found myself on set with big movie stars, and I felt like I was less famous, less experienced than them, which I was. But I translated that in my head that I am not talented enough to be there. I don't belong there. I don't fit in. I'm an outsider. And what's interesting, and it was really painful to, you know, I had anxiety and it impacted my performance, but it also impacted how I related to other people. I felt like I was trying to be somebody I was not. I completely lost myself. I lost my ability to play on set, to access my creativity, to be daring when I'm doing my job. And I felt like crap. You know, the good thing I think is that time, it lasted for a couple of years, is that it pushed me then to address my mental game and then do the work. I was like, what is the darn work? Everybody says, do the work. And I was like, what's the stupid work? And the work is the self-discovery, as which was really interesting for me because I had thought that my problem was that I was a choker, that I couldn't handle pressure. But what I discovered was I didn't have self-awareness. I didn't have tools to manage my thoughts and emotions. I didn't understand what the meaning of my life was. I didn't do the introspection that Alisyn, you did as you were writing your memoir. looking at our past, seeing the thread from the past to the present to the future. So that big moment of vulnerability in my career led to not knowing my strength, but to getting stronger, to growing, and also understanding that this is an ongoing process. We never arrive. When things happen in our lives, we feel less than, we feel guilty. All these things happen, but if we have a toolkit, and if we know what inspires us, if we know our support system, we know how to reflect and gain new insight, then we learn to navigate those moments better.
I don't have a better answer than that. I think that I think having a public facing life gave me in some strange way a mask that I could wear. You know, it's when you're a newscaster, you're made up and somebody does your hair and you're dressed in kind of a costume of primary colors, jewel tones. And that was a kind of a suit of armor. Yeah, a suit of armor that I could wear where, you know, you don't see behind that mask. And so for a long time, that really worked for me in my 20s and 30s, where, you know, in a way that kind of can deflect whatever is, you know, going on behind. But then at some point it stopped working. And particularly when I was telling other people's very vulnerable, very raw stories, there were moments in journalism where I wanted to say, like, oh, I get it. Oh, I've been there. I see you. You know, there were moments where I wanted to like reach out and have that moment of connection. But in the rules of journalism, you know, you don't do that. You don't make yourself the story. You don't insert yourself. And that started to kind of not work for me. And that's when I started writing Combat Love, because I thought, well, I obviously want to let people know that I am not just this kind of polished person who's never had a hard day in her life. I have. I can relate to people who don't exactly know where they're living or where they'll be finding their next meal, or, you know, being broke is basically it, and having mental health struggles. And so I felt like it was, I got to the point where I was ready for more authentic connection. And, you know, the book helped me do that.
So that works perfectly into my next question, Alisyn, because
she knew that, just so you know.
I did. I'm curious. Where do you see yourself in 15 years? Or what would you like your legacy to be?
You know,
and then Stephanie, you'll have to answer after that.
So in my experience, the strange thing about grief that I didn't know before experiencing it was, for me, it has robbed me, or maybe just freed me from any ability to plan the future. I am so in the present. I'm so focused. I'm so firmly focused on the present, because every day of managing my grief, trying to manage my kids' grief, or trying to help them with their grief, trying to have us still accomplish the stuff that life needs, of bill paying, of my son doing a final paper in order to graduate, of, you know, taking care of my kids. People have asked me if I can go do something with them in June. That's like, you know, 10 days away. I'm like, that's way too far. I have no idea what will be happening in June. And so it's very, very, very hard for me to plan. So I have no idea, you know, for me, it just doesn't work that way. You know, make plans and God laughs. Like, I just don't believe that anything that I say will be true 15 years from now. So, yeah, so I can, 15 minutes from now, I think I'll have something to eat. That's as far as I've gotten.
That's an interesting perspective. That's a really interesting, and Stephanie, I'm interested to hear what you have to say, because that's a great question, Joy. Because life does, whatever the circumstances are in your life, that's what will guide you to whatever decisions you make in the future. Like, that's really powerful.
I mean, look, I do believe in free will. I do believe we have agency. I do believe you can set your sail for someplace, but I just don't have any vision for anymore for where that destination would be.
But can I ask you, Alisyn, not that this is a therapy session, because that would be all joy, but I'm just wondering, so were you like that before? And is this a piece of like, is this heart centered? You know what I mean? Like, is it part of the sadness? Do you think that that's what it still is?
Yeah, I do. I also think that like life has delivered such a gut punch that
Yeah,
it's like
yeah,
you can make your plans, go right ahead.
yeah.
It doesn't mean that any of them will ever work out. And so, yes, so part of it is definitely grief talking. And beforehand, what I used to love to do was anticipate things. So I used to love to have something I looked forward to in the future and the anticipation of it and, really look forward to it. And I guess grief has robbed me of that. So I'm not doing that right now.
Yeah.
We actually talked about that, Alisyn. Remember when we were under the rain having a glass of wine? And you said, "Do you look forward to things in life?" And I was like, "No, I don't." Like, I don't. We had sort of this conversation, and I don't look to the future, thinking, "Oh, we're going to do this, we're going to do that." And I don't think I've ever done that. I've never had goals, like put goals on a piece of paper. I think, like you were saying, Alisyn, you make plans and God laughs. My whole life has sort of been a happy accident in a way, like, just like on set when something happens that is not planned. Uh, you can look at it like an obstacle, or you can sort of pivot and be like, oh, what is this opportunity? What can I do here? What is entering in my life? And um, everything I've done, I started acting when I was 29. I wrote a book at 50. I'm doing work in the mental health space, doing public speaking, which I was so afraid. I never thought I would do speaking. So, where do I see myself in 15 years? I have no idea. I think what I really want to focus on is um, just living life in the most aligned way that I can, with what is important to me, making new connections, learning, and being present enough to take risks and go pivot and do something else. I hope I will be acting because that is my passion. And my legacy, I don't really think of that. I think I'll be dead, so I just hope I can inspire my children, to go after their passion and to support their family in the way that my husband and I support each other.
Mm.
It's really interesting how, your life, as you said, changes everything in a moment. And we need to be in the flow of the now. And that's what I'm hearing. And I don't know about the legacy that you each have, but I do know that both of you are making a huge change in the world. Acting in journalism was important, but I know that reading your books and listening to your words really is making a huge change. And I need to say that out loud because you really are coming from the heart, and that's what people need to hear, and they do hear when they listen to both of you. So I thank you for that.
Thank you, Joy, so much.
Yeah, thank you, Joy. You're always you're so enthusiastic and you're so supportive and such a cheerleader, and that goes a long way.
Yeah.
And I love what you said, sharing from the heart. And that's where I learned from other people. But when we do that to ourselves, when we come from a place of vulnerability, I think that's when we connect with others in a way where we feel closer and a true connection, where, like you said, Alisyn, the mask goes off. And that's what life is about, just connecting with one another.
I think that's so beautiful. And I think that I want to encourage listeners and those who are watching this to make sure that where can they find your books? Alisyn, where can they find your book?
Well, I mean, I hate to
Books.
say this. I hate to give Amazon more business because I think Jeff Bezos is doing fine. But I do find lately that book sales are, at local bookstores, it's hard. They don't have a lot of shelf space. So that is probably the most logical place that they can order it from, or Barnes and Noble. So yeah, that's where right now.
Great.
Same.
Stephanie, same?
Same. Yeah.
Okay, wonderful. We're going to be hearing more from the two of you for Resiliency 2025, September 10th. This is so great. And before we leave, because we could be, you two are so fascinating and inspiring. I think that's why it's so important for you both to have written your books, because it does unveil your truths, And so I want to ask you, because this is called Believe in People. Why do you both believe in people?
I believe we all have a light inside of us, and that it's there, and it just gets dark sometimes. But when we come to each other from a place of truth, the light comes out, and the good prevails. And it's not about being all good or all positive. It's just being truthful, I think.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, people always surprise me, always. And in journalism, I've met, such a cross section of people, and I'm always impressed, inspired, charmed by people in just interesting places. I still believe in people, even though there are some people right now who are huge jackasses and who are really annoying me, for sure. The vast majority of people are really cool, and I can learn something from them, and they just never cease to surprise me. So that gives me a lot of hope that we'll survive whatever challenges we're facing.
Yeah, more than ever, right? We need to believe in people because of the very reason you just said, Thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Well, I mean, to think about the fact that they came from, in some ways, addiction, and they came from adversity, and in some ways they were on their own, and they've come to this place, like they really have sorted it through. They've done the work. I'm not saying they've done all the work, but they also know that there's a lot of work still to be done, which I thought was really fascinating talking about the masks. Here's two beautiful women just, that are stunning, and they talk about how they have to strip that away, and they don't want to be seen that way. It was just interesting. It was fascinating.
Yeah, it was such a great conversation, and I have such a better understanding of who they are as women, and their strength that they have through all of the experiences they've had, and they have such a authentic understanding of where they are in their life today. So that's what I find is so fascinating.
Yeah, I do too. I really do too. And I think it was fascinating that they came back to the mental health aspect, and how that's become so important. And it's been a part of them even when they were young. They just didn't know it. And it kind of shaped who they were then and now.
Exactly. Well, thank you for Believe in People, and thank you for being a co-host on today's talk, because it was just so rewarding. Like, it was just such a great experience. Thanks, Joy.
Thank you for having me.